There we go. Okay, this should give you a better view of what's going on as far as what I'm typing on the command line. In this part, we're going to talk about the concept of root, the concept of flags, some use of the root, what flags are, and then some other basic commands that you'll need to know. So to log in, you'll just use what you chose earlier. Oops. Something you'll notice about Linux is that when you type a password, you don't get asterisks, you just get a blank. That's okay. Here's the warning about there's no warranty with this stuff, and this should come up pretty much every time. So to start, let's talk about what root is. If you're familiar with Windows administration, it's basically the equivalent of the local admin. It gives you the power to do anything on the box, edit anything, and above all, break anything. One of the commands that we'll use is sudo, and what this stands for is super user do. Any command prefaced by sudo will give you the ability to become root to run that single command. If you add users to this box, you'll have to have them in a very specific configuration and part of a group. Otherwise, they won't be able to use sudo. While we're here, we can talk about flags. A flag is anything that ends with a dash, so like sudo, you can use -i. There's a couple others. You can also use sudo. You can use su. So superuser do su will make you the superuser, and see it prompts for a password when you put it in. And as you can see, I went from being Silver Sphinx to root. To get out of this kind of thing, you just type exit. You'll go back to your default standard user. You can also identify the difference because you can see a $sign in front of the Silver Sphinx logon, the Silver Sphinx prompt, and a hash or an octothorpe in front of the root one. This is a quick and easy identifier as to whether you've actually made it to root. Commands editing config require configurations on the machine, not just in folders that belong to you and files that you've created. You'll need to use sudo with those. In here, another command is ls, and as you can see, there's nothing in here, but that's not true. In Linux, anything that begins with a dot file name, so period anything, is actually hidden from the standard ls command. To do this, ls and then flag, L for a list, A for all. The list will give you when it was created, what your permissions are to it, and the all will get you even the hidden files. There were a couple questions asked in chat during the break. The first one was, will I be covering different window managers? And we are, later on, we're going to install Xorg from scratch, and then I'm going to cover two different GUIs. We're going to do OpenBox, which is a super lightweight XML configured window manager, and then we're going to do i3, which is a tiling window manager with its own special configuration file. There was also a question about what are the most popular versions of Linux. Google yielded some answers. For me, I learned on Debian and Slackware. Debian has a really slow release cycle like we mentioned before, and Slackware is pretty much as hard as it gets unless you want to compile everything. If you want to try and compile everything, that would be Gen 2. So now we're going to move on to PWD, which stands for Print Working Directory. It'll just tell you where you are. As you can see, this says that I'm in /home/Silver Sphinx. The file systems on a Linux computer are based around everything originating at the slash. So if we go there with CD to change directory, just like in Windows, slash, you'll see that it's actually a place. And with an ls here, you can see all of the things below it. So to go back home, it's just CD home, and you can type H tab to tab complete. If you hit tab and nothing comes up, if you tap it again or twice quickly, it will show you a list of what can come up. So for instance, in this, if I type M and tab twice, it'll tell me that I can either go into media or mount, MNT. But let's go back home. View ls here, you'll see that there's just one folder, and it's the user Silver Sphinx. And there's nothing in here except for the hidden files. You may have noticed before that I used one dash and string together a couple of files. It doesn't matter whether you do ls-a or ls-l, ls-a-l, it's just shorter. And in lots of programs you can combine these. PWD is basically your where are you? Where am I currently located? What directory am I working in? We've covered CD a little bit. It stands for change directory, and it lets you move around in the system. You'll find out that in Ubuntu you can move around to pretty much everywhere. You just can't edit anything. Touch is kind of an interesting one. Touch, T-O-U-C-H, if I can type. It's really interesting because it basically creates an empty file if one doesn't exist. So if I touch anything and then ls, there's a file in here called anything. If I use an ls-a-l, oops, it'll show that it has no file size, the column next to the month. So we've created an empty one, we've created an empty file, but how do we remove things? In Windows you use del. In Linux you use the command rm. There are some flags that are very crucial here. -R works for directories. It makes them go recursively, meaning that it'll start at the very bottom, delete all the files out of a folder, move up, delete the folder and all the files that you are in there, move up, delete the folder, move up, delete the folder until you get to the very top by only calling the top level folder. And then F is force. Force makes it to where it won't prompt you to delete things, because if you just use R in some Linux systems, it'll prompt you for every file it tries to delete, and that can get boring really quickly. No matter what anyone tells you, never enter this command and hit enter, because it will start at the top level directory and delete everything down, and when you get to the bottom, it's the equivalent of deleting System 32 in older Windows. It'll boot to the bootloader and be done. So we have anything in here, as you can see from the ls command. You can use rm-rf anything or any tab and hit enter, and then when we look again, it's gone. So that's the basics of deleting a file, how to view files, how to know where you are in the world, and sudo, which you'll need. And Linux, Ubuntu specifically, will prompt you every time you need to enter sudo. It'll tell you lock, usually. We're going to discuss the shutdown command, but I won't run it until the end, and there are a couple of different ways to run it. You have to use sudo to do this, and I'll show you with shutdown what it'll look like when you don't. There are two different sets of flags here that I use on a fairly regular basis. There's -R, which is the equivalent of rebooting your machine, rebooting your Windows computer, but it requires a time argument. Those time arguments can be in minutes, and the one that I use most often is now, which means that it'll go right down right now. So if I use it here, it prompted me and told me that I needed to be root. To do this, to run this command, you would type sudo in front of it. Another handy thing is double bang. So if you happen to type, it's double exclamation point. If you happen to type something and it tells you that you need to be root, if you type sudo space exclamation point, it will repeat the above command with sudo in front of it. Let's see. We're going to go up to the root directory, or what is slash, so the very top, ls, and you'll see a bunch of stuff in here. Home is where all the user's stuff is hidden. Root, in this instance, is the root user's home directory. We're going to go into etc, and we're going to type ls. And if you look in here, there's a lot of stuff. And part of it went by so fast we couldn't see it. So using this example, we're going to talk about pipes and another service called less, another command called less. So all those things ran by too quickly, and we can't really go back up to see them, because in a normal terminal you wouldn't have a mouse, you wouldn't have a way to go back up. Some systems let you use page up and page down. Another easy way to do this is ls, and this is a pipe. It's the shift of a backslash, space, and the word less, and now it puts them all in a nice thing where they're alphabetical from the top, and we can see everything in here. The coloring is gone, as you can see, but we can still see everything in here. The space bar jumps to the next screen, so you can jump down, down, down until you hit end. To get out of this, hit Q. It'll drop you back to the prompt. But at least here you can identify what you're actually trying to use if it all scrolls by too quickly. Another one that's really nifty, if you know that the file is in there, but you can't quite remember what it's called, or you know what it's called but want to check for it, and we'll use a pipe again to do this, is grep, G-R-E-P. So I know that X11 is in there, capital X11, so I'm going to use X11 as the argument on grep, and it will return that yes, there is X11 in there. If I tell it something that there's no way it could be in there, command not found because I put the semicolon, it returns nothing. It just returns you to the prompt. This is really handy for pulling stuff out of directories. It's also nifty if you're redirecting something into it, which we'll get to in a minute. It also has regular expressions attached to it, which we'll cover in a later video. So standard redirection. The echo command does exactly what it does in a Windows box. It echoes back to you whatever you put as its argument. And I use quotes here so that if you add spaces, it doesn't go away. We're going to use echo to understand direct redirection. But before we go there, I want to talk about cat, or concatenate. So if we go back in here and use ls, we're going to use hosts, for instance. If you type cat hosts and hit enter, it'll print what is in hosts. And this host file is the same with the same thing as a host file on a Windows box, with a little different format to how it prints it out and how it's put in there. We're going to use this when we create files in a moment. So with the echo command and some quotes, if we want to put it in a file, we simply put a sideways caret and give it a name. So we'll call this test.txt. Oh, and I'm in Etsy, so I got permission denied. I have to go back down to my folder, my home folder. To do this quickly, we'll use a tilde, which is shift above the tab and next to the 1. This will drop me back into my home folder. See, there's nothing in it. Using up and down arrow keys here, and they let you cycle back through what you've already put in. See, no error. If I type ls, you'll see that test.txt is in here, and cat test will show this is line 1. If we go back up to our echo command and change this to line 2, you might expect it to just add to it. Recat the test, and it overwrote it. This is because to append or to add to a file you need 2. If I do this now and modify this so that we can see it, and cat out test, you'll see that now there are 2 lines and it was appended to the bottom. This can work the other way around. So if you have something that you need input from and to, if you change those around, they'll go the other way. You can actually pull stuff out of a text file into a command of whatever kind that you're running. Another thing that I may fail to talk about CD is the ... If we go back in here to ls, la, you'll see that there are 2 here that are just periods. The first one just tells the location on any path current, and that's useful when you have commands that have arguments that they need to go from somewhere to somewhere else. You'll have period as the second one, especially if you're already in that folder. ... with a cd command takes you up 1 level. As you can see here. The next thing I want to talk about is ifconfig, and this is if you need to get your IP. It's similar to ipconfig, but different also. So here's what networking generally looks like in Linux. You have, in this case, ETH0 and LO. LO is your loopback. You'll notice that its INET address is 127.0.0.1 with a 255.0.0.0 mask. This is how things communicate between processes in Linux. They bounce around on this LO. So if you're running a database server and a web server and stuff needs to move between those 2 places, which most likely it would, it'll do it on LO. ETH0 is your actual network card. And in this instance, it got a 192.168.36.129. This was assigned by default from VMplayer. ifconfig allows you to take interfaces up and down by using ifconfig, the name of the interface, in this case ETH0, and then the words up or down. If you take it down, it tells you that it's not permitted. If I use sudo with it, and that handy shortcut with the double exclamation point, it asks for my password. And now if I ifconfig, you'll notice that it's not there anymore. That's because it's offline. To bring that back, use up. Oop. And you'll see it there. You'll also notice the second time it didn't ask me for a root password. That's because the command line stores for a very short amount of time. I think it's 5 minutes. It'll store the cache credentials for you actually going to sudo. While we're talking about sudo, there was a question asked in chat about how do you always have sudo. So to become the root user is in essence what you're asking, and to do that you use sudo either su and you'll become root, or sudo -i. The difference between these two is one of them you become root and keep all of your path variables. The other one is an interactive login, so you take over the root's path. We talked a little bit about we talked about ifconfig, and one of the main reasons that we talked about it was I wanted to introduce a couple of modifiers that you can use to string commands together. We've already discussed grep, which lets you basically take data from one command to the pipes, excuse me. Take one command to the next, to the next, to the next, and you can do that ad nauseum. Another one that's kind of handy is double ampersand, like this. And the way that you would use it is if you need to shut down and then bring back up your interface, your networking interface, you could do down here and then up here, and when I execute this, it expected another sudo. When I do this, nothing appears to happen. But what is actually happening in the background that's too fast for us to see because it's going down and right back up is we're resetting the interface. We're basically taking it offline and pulling it back online. There was a question asked in regards to sudo again about which one is better to use, the -i or the -su. It depends on what you're doing. If you want to maintain your variables, your control of your path that you've already set up meticulously, it's better to use the -i. If you want to be purely root, mess only with the root variables, the su will give you that ability. So the next thing that I'd like to cover is package management. Package management, because all of the stuff as far as that's associated with Linux is free under GPL, there has to be a way to control what's installed on your machine and what isn't. And package management is how that works. There are a couple ways that you can do this. There's what's called a curses front end, which gives you a graphical interface, and a command line utility called apt. Apt has a lot of facets. We're going to discuss the installation part now. We'll cover how to remove packages and do that cleanly in another video. To use apt, you have to be root. So you have to either use sudo and the command, or actually become root. So in this instance, I'm going to use sudo. Apt is the command, and then -get to tell it. It's going to tell apt to go out and get this package that you tell it next. You want it to install that package once it retrieves it, and then we're going to have it do aptitude. And in this instance, aptitude is already installed. You can use aptitude to get everything from libraries for compiling to the Xorg, which is what your GUI will run on, clear up to GUIs and full DEs. So with aptitude already installed, we will run it. And this is what aptitude looks like rather than using the command line utility. Aptitude's very cool because you can search fairly straightforwardly with it, and you do that with a /. So if we wanted to install iftop, which lets you monitor bandwidth in and off the box, you would simply type it in here and then hit OK. In this interface, you'll see that there is IFTop is displayed, and then the column with a bunch of nuns in it is what version is installed on your computer, and then what version is available is on the far right. To select IFTop, you have to use the plus symbol, and this is a warning because I'm not root. Later on, we'll be prompted to become root in order to get this to work and actually install. So you tell it OK, and now we have selected IFTop to install. If you hit G, it will tell you what it's going to install, and this is where you get the final proofread to make sure that you're only getting what you want. And then you hit G again, and in this case it's going to prompt me because I wasn't root. Well, I didn't execute aptitude with sudo. If I become root by hitting enter, it'll take my cache credentials that are in there, and then hit G again. It should go connect and install them. Some files were not downloaded successfully. Q will let you exit. With apt, there's this idea of a local repository, which is basically a list of all of the things that could be installed and may need to be updated from time to time, and this is how you do it. It helps if I can type. It looks to me like at some point my network got broken. Let's see if we can't fix this quickly. Okay, well, let's try restarting. So to do that, you need sudo shut down, and this should reboot the computer. There we go. So now we can use apt get update with sudo. It'll go out and contact to make sure that it gets all the freshest, newest packages that you can install. Okay, now we'll use apt-get on the command line to install ifconfig. Sorry, not ifconfig, iftop. And this is what it looks like. This went ahead and took the, sometimes it'll prompt you if you're installing more than one package. This went ahead because I only requested one package and there was no dependencies. It went ahead and just installed it. As you can see here, it's telling you that there's no upgrades, one newly installed, no removals, and no that were held back. It's going to be 37.6 KB, and then after that it tells you how big it will be on your disk. If I use iftop, I don't have permission, so we'll use sudo, and this is listening on ETH0 for any traffic. There's nothing going on right now, so you can't see anything, but if I were to be doing something on my network from this box, you would be able to see all the traffic in and out of this machine. Another thing that you can use app for, is cache, C-A-C-H-E, search, and this will let you search through your local cache to see what is available. This is usually very useful if you say you have a laptop and you've downloaded and done an update for the cache, and then you're away and you need to figure out what you want to update. You can go through here and figure out what all of your updates are, what programs you might like to install. We're going to search for Nano, which is a text editor, and you'll see that it comes up with all of them. And there's too many, some of them are off the screen. So if we use that less again, we'll be able to go through it one level at a time. And as you can see, there's one here called Nano Tiny. It's a friendly text editor inspired by Pico. Hit Q to end. Append this with Tiny. And hit enter, and it will install. Oh, I'm still searching. You have to go back and change this to get and install. And it goes out to get it and set it up.